Authorities in southern Ukraine are racing to evacuate thousands of residents. The breaching of the Kakhovka dam has flooded dozens of towns and villages. The United Nations aid chief says it could be the worst damage to civilian infrastructure in this war. Kyiv claims Moscow blew up the Russian-controlled dam located on the front line to slow any counteroffensive. Russia accuses Ukraine of sabotage. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has told both leaders in phone calls that an international investigation is needed.
Volunteers and rescue workers use motorized dinghies to pick up people downstream from the destroyed dam trapped by the rising floodwaters, along with their pets. Residents along the right bank of the Dnipro River, controlled by Ukraine, are being taken to temporary evacuation zones by road and by rail. One of them is in the city of Mykolaiv, 100 kilometers from the flood zone in Kherson. There are paramedics as well as volunteers to help the evacuees find food and shelter. The collapse of the dam has brought further misery for tens of thousands already caught on the front lines of the war between Ukraine and Russia. 65-year-old Hanna Zaporizhzhia emerged from a bomb shelter after 3 days of Russian shelling to find her home submerged.
The city is like a ravine, completely flooded. It's impossible to drive through there. People were trapped in what became like an island. I was taken away by my friends. I had to leave because, having spent 3 nights in a bomb shelter, I just couldn't take it anymore.
But Hanna Zaporizhzhia is luckier than most. Her ordeal has ended on a bright moment. Her sisters live in Mykolaiv, so she has a place to stay and shoulders to lean on. While those living along Ukraine's lower Dnipro River are now dealing with the immediate consequences of the dam's collapse, the impact may be felt for generations, with thousands of homes and livelihoods swept away in the disaster.
Our correspondent Sonia Farnica is in Kherson City, which is controlled by Ukraine. I asked her to describe the situation.
Well, Ben, so I'm in a residential neighborhood here in Kherson where there is a rescue and evacuation operation still going on. The Dnipro River is right behind me. It's about 500 meters behind me. And we've been speaking to local officials here. One of them told me that he could actually walk down the street that you're seeing behind me, submerged completely underwater. He could walk down that street yesterday. Water levels here have risen dramatically overnight. Now, there are rescue teams here that are on standby with rubber boats and, vehicles that can wade through the water. And that's because officials have told us that though some residents have been evacuated here, some are refusing to leave their homes, and they're hoping to, kind of go by and convince them. And this is a situation we're seeing in many neighborhoods in Kherson, especially close to the river, really dramatic scenes of people being evacuated by boat, of even kind of roofs having come off some houses, which are completely submerged. Now, we've also been to the city of Mykolaiv, which is about 80 kilometers away from here. And what is kind of striking is that, of course, cities like Dnipro, cities like Kherson, which are directly on the river, have been affected. But of course, there are towns much further inland that have also been affected. We spoke to a woman who was unable to go back to her home because though her town was quite dry, it's north of Kherson, she said the bridges and the roads there had been washed away, and so she couldn't get there. And I think this is a problem that many rescue teams are now facing, the fact that they cannot access some of these settlements. We're hearing of rescue teams also coming in now from Kyiv with equipment like generators and water treatment plants and rubber boats. So it's quite a dramatic situation still.
And where are people actually going? Because there are reports of Russian shelling of the affected Ukrainian areas as people have been trying to evacuate. And I guess we're talking about a huge area that's underwater now.
Well, the officials we spoke to here in the city earlier, they told us that the city of Kherson has set up a few evacuation shelters already, mainly in schools and gyms. They say some people have been taken there. We heard of an emergency train that was set up yesterday to take people to that town of Mykolaiv, which is the next biggest city. That was an emergency train. They're still organizing buses there. We were actually at the bus station in Mykolaiv, and we spoke to the local Red Cross official there. And he actually said, which was quite interesting, he said that, not many people had actually come in from Kherson because they preferred to probably stay with relatives on higher ground closer to their homes. So only about more than 40 people, he said, had arrived on train there yesterday, though, rescue teams there were on standby to help.
Sonia Falniker for us, reporting there from Kherson. Thank you.
Giuliano Stokino-Weiss is a rapid response coordinator with the International Rescue Committee based in Kyiv. And earlier he described to me how his team on the ground is handling the situation.
Currently, we at the International Rescue Committee are carrying out rapid needs assessments. We are focusing on the first phase of our response in Mykolaiv. We're seeing that people are still being evacuated from the flooded areas. So the numbers currently are around 3,000 people who have left Kherson. What we are seeing is that Mykolaiv is a transit area and people are moving towards Odessa and other central regions of Ukraine. Our teams in Odessa are also preparing shelters to be able to receive people evacuating from Kherson.
Now, the Russians and the Ukrainians both say the collapse has not caused any civilian casualties, but the sheer dimension of the flooding makes that very hard to believe. Can your people corroborate the official information?
What is very important to highlight here is that we're dealing with an emergency inside an emergency. This attack is yet another very serious violation of international humanitarian law. We are very concerned that we are dealing with 16,000 people directly affected by the flooding. We're talking about people's livelihoods, people's homes have been made inhabitable. We're talking about an area of 650 square kilometers that is now completely flooded. This is, without a question, a infringe on international humanitarian law. And that is why, with the International Rescue Committee and other organizations, including the UN organizations, we're doing our best to help the people evacuating. And of course, what I'd like to highlight is we're not only going to take part in the immediate evacuation part, but also as soon as these areas will become accessible again. The official news state that it's going to be around 10 days until the water will be up to this level. We'll be making sure that we'll be accessing to these areas and helping the people who remained and facilitating their safe return.
And it will be until then that we do not know the true extent of this. Now, this river is also a front line between Russian and Ukrainian controlled territories. How is that complicating aid efforts for your organization and others?
It's extremely complex. We are not only dealing with the fact that these areas have been under constant shelling for the last months or almost a year now, but also that these are mine-ridden territories. We have been receiving information, also pictures from our colleagues on the ground, that now the mines, the unexploded ordnances, have been floating around, making the area extremely dangerous for both the population and our teams on the ground. So access is a severe problem in this case. So we'll be working closely together with the Civil Protection Unit of Ukraine to see what is the best approach in evacuating people and accessing the areas once they once the water has retreated.
That was Giuliano Stokino-Weiss, the IRC Rapid Response Team. Thank you so much for your time. Fears are the floods could impact the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which draws water for cooling from the Dnipro River. To walk us through the dangers, let's bring in Professor Najmuddin Mashkati with the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering of the University of Southern California. Good to have you on the show. Now, there was grave concern about the Zaporizhzhia power plant before this already. How much bigger is the risk of a nuclear catastrophe after the collapse of this dam?
Good afternoon. Fortunately, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is 130 kilometers upstream from this dam failure, and it would not be flooded. But Zaporizhzhia is depending for its cooling water and the ultimate heat sink to the water from the Kakhovka reservoir. And if that reservoir drains and the water basically lost, then that Zaporizhzhia will have a problem for its cooling. However, there are cooling ponds over there that we have enough reserve water. But when the water level goes down from the reservoir, they cannot pump it with the stationary pump. They need to bring diesel operated pumps, which, by the way, they have, after the Fukushima accident of 2011, they have somehow developed this contingency plan. But my biggest worry for Zaporizhzhia is not immediately the access to power, is the problem of the kinetic and the hostility around that and the accidental shelling and all of those things that could happen, and loss of off-site power, because we have only one off-site power that gets electricity to Zaporizhzhia.
Now, despite the obvious, which would be a halt in hostilities, what are the immediate measures that, as far as you're concerned, need to be taken to ensure the safety of the plant?
One of the most immediate measures is exactly to follow the 5 principles which was laid out by Director General of International Atomic Energy Agency, Mr. Mariana Budjeryn, last week at the UN Security Council, not to shoot from and to the nuclear power plants. That's one of the most important things. The other thing, we need to make sure that we have constant, reliable off-site power to the nuclear plant, because the 2 lifeline of any nuclear plant is electricity and water. And we need to make sure that the nuclear plant, whether operational or in shutdown mode, they have a constant, reliable source of off-site electricity and access to water.
Najmuddin Mishkati of the University of Southern California, many thanks.
Thank you.
Mariana Budjeryn is a senior research associate at the Project on Managing the Atom at the Harvard Kennedy School Belfer Center in Boston. How big is the risk of a nuclear catastrophe? The head of the UN Atomic Energy Agency is travelling to the area next week.
Well, according to the IEA and according to Ukraine's nuclear operator, Energoatom, there actually isn't an imminent or critical risk right now to Zaporizhzhia after the dam has been breached. But of course, we know that a safe and secure operation of a nuclear power plant relies on a constant and reliable supply of water. With the levels in the Kakhovka reservoir dropping dramatically, there is a danger that the pumping and the piping system, after the water drops under a certain level, will not be able to reach and pump the water. There are, of course, backup systems. There's a man-made cooling pond that has been filled and is being filled right now very rapidly to provide that emergency water. But of course, nuclear power plants are not designed to operate in a war zone, and they're not designed to operate and constantly responding to these very critical, and drastic changes in conditions. And my concern is the state of the operating staff that is constantly put in a position to respond to the situation. And they're already working under really difficult conditions of occupation by the Russian forces.
Could you also tell us about the implications of Russian occupying forces having allegedly mined the reactor units?
Well, if it is the Russians who blew up the dam, and if I were a betting woman, I would put my money on that option, then it's really not very reassuring as to what the Russians might do with the mined nuclear reactors. Now, this might not cause the kind of, Chernobyl type catastrophe. But again, we see that the Russian forces are not shy to cause major disruptions, right? This is what this is, a major humanitarian catastrophe after the blowing up of the dam that is going to keep Ukraine occupied and the Ukrainian authorities occupied for years, if not decades to come. So I would not put it beyond them to do a similar type of a disruption, a major disaster, if not a radiological release. That's something very damaging if they're in a situation to retreat from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant.
The analysis there from Mariana Budjeryn, Harvard Kennedy School Belfair Centre. Thank you very much.
Thank you.